I stand in a room of endless mirrors, lights refracting into infinity. I stare off into the distance, but only the same pairs of eyes meet mine. I look down at my hands, almost as if searching for confirmation that I still belong in reality. Even my hands feel lighter, almost as if the space itself was loosening something inside me. And then it hits me. Eva, my 5-year-old cousin. I must admit, it wasn't that she was a burden to me, but it gets to a point where caring for a 5-year-old starts to get frustrating. And when I least expected it, she slipped away. I started rushing through a mirrored maze, palms out like a confused mime bumping into invisible walls, and then I see it. Out of the corner of my eye, the end of a small black ponytail whisks by. Aha! I caught her, I thought to myself. I grabbed her hand. Eva, how could you run off like that? Do you have any idea? I stopped. She isn't resisting. Instead, she slowly turned her head towards me, and she smiles. It was something about that smile, something about the way she wouldn't stop grinning from ear to ear as she continued to look around with only her eyes, an expression that I would never forget. The room we were standing in was part of the Broad Art Museum's permanent collection, an artwork by Yoi Kusama titled Infinity Mirror Rooms. It was an installation I hadn't given much thought to before I stepped inside that day. It's been 2 years since that moment, which is definitely more than enough time to think that you've moved on. But I haven't. Because being in that space with my cousin made something quite clear to me. For the longest time, art was something you looked at from a distance. Even now, the viewer's role is really simple. Stand still, take a few glances, and move on. Sometimes that's enough. Other times it can be limiting and uninteresting. But over time, artists have begun responding to that gap. Instead of asking viewers to observe from afar, they create spaces for people to walk in and to observe from within. The focus changes from merely seeing art to actually experiencing it. And this focus is exactly at the heart of what we now call contemporary art. But what is contemporary art? Well, the dictionary definition, according to the Getty Museum, is art produced by living artists about relevant issues. Emphasis on the relevant issues. Contemporary artworks focus on what is happening right now, working to shape the modern contemporary art landscape. And this exact relevance is what makes contemporary art feel so urgent and important. And as an aspiring contemporary artist myself, I began thinking less about delivering a fixed message and more about creating a condition for people to have unique experiences. For me, whether I'm looking at my own artwork or looking at other contemporary artwork, the same questions always come to mind. How will the audience react to the work? How can people engage with it? And is the artwork clear enough so that anyone can understand it? And this is true of many contemporary artworks today. Artists of today not only have to focus on what the artwork looks like, but also how it reaches people across boundaries of age, background, and experience. But this is also where much of the hatred around contemporary artworks begin. Throughout history, whenever art has shifted away from tradition, it has faced public backlash. For example, modern art movements of the late 19th and early 20th century, such as Impressionism, whenever it began to fade away from realism, many people started to hate it. The common consensus was that art should require visible skill, detail, and craftsmanship. If it didn't look difficult to make, then it simply wasn't good enough. And contemporary art faces that same skepticism. Because contemporary art prioritizes concept, interaction, and social commentary over traditional techniques, people often confuse it for being too simplistic, too abstract, or even labeled as fake art. This is a stereotype that has been deeply ingrained in society, and it's something that I like to talk about today. Now, what comes to mind when you think of the words contemporary art? Is it something like this? And yes, that is just a white canvas. Or something like this. Now let me tell you, you're not wrong. These are some of the most celebrated examples of contemporary art, but they don't offer us the full picture. Many of us stop here, believing that all contemporary artworks are just variations of the same style. But when in reality, it has so much more to offer. I remember asking my cousin what she saw when she looked at this specific painting. She hesitated for a second. Then she looked up at me confidently and pointed to a blob in the bottom right corner and said, "Look, that looks like the rabbit I drew yesterday." I remember I looked at her, confusingly. Nothing about that resembled a rabbit to me, but of course I wasn't going to admit that out loud. But then, looking back at that conversation, I finally realized something. What mattered wasn't whether she was correct. What mattered was that she was happy to respond. And it made things clear to me that artworks like these don't require expertise or additional knowledge to become meaningful. Even as someone as young as her could form an opinion, think of something personal, and take away from the experience. In fact, even criticizing or questioning an artwork is a valid form of engagement. It means you're thinking, reacting, and participating rather than standing outside of it. And there's many different ways to view an artwork, but what contemporary artworks do is they maximize the scope of possibilities. A lot of artworks of the past, they present one linear storyline or present one moment in history, but contemporary artwork, just like the abstract artwork you see here, actually encourage and almost dare the viewer to come up with as many unique interpretations as possible. So, what stayed with me at that day at the Broad Museum wasn't what my cousin saw, but what she experienced. It was engagement. It was curiosity. It was a 5-year-old discovering art not by reading a label off a wall, but by stepping inside it. And this became a great example of how one single visit could go into so many different interpretations. My cousin, after she left the room, started talking about what she wanted to draw next and a few fun stories that she wanted to tell her friends. As for me, I left with something different. I finally got to see an artwork by an artist I admired for a very long time and got some new inspiration for my own art. And as for my mom, she left with a few cute photos for her Facebook group chat. But none of these takeaways are wrong, and none of these takeaways are more correct than the other. What you take away from the experience is definitely different to a 5-year-old or to a professional art critic, but the point becomes that anyone can take away from the experience, whether that be an inspiration, a conversation, or just a good time. Because the fact of the matter is, maybe the very simplicity or broadness that contemporary art was once hated for is exactly what makes it so effective. But you're probably asking yourself, how is this relevant? Why does this matter to me? Well, at some point of our lives, many of us have felt lost standing in front of art. Not because we don't care, but because we don't know where to begin. We don't know what to notice, we don't know if we're missing something, or whether we belong in that space at all. So what can we do to change that? One way to approach this issue is through something simple that I like to call the 3 E's of exploring art. First, enter. The first step is just having the confidence to enter an art museum. Slow down, let yourself be there. We often overthink about what we need to prepare beforehand or find excuses as why not to go. And I used to think of the same thing. But then over time I realized I don't actually need to justify myself. Many of us worry thinking about a specific reason or a goal to attend, but in reality, oftentimes the hardest part is just getting started. Second, engage. Once you're there, you don't need to understand every single artwork that you see. Just pay attention to what pulls you in, what interests you to look a little longer. Maybe a specific artwork stood out to you. Maybe you found a new artist you really liked, or maybe you just got some cute photos. That reaction, no matter how random or simple it may seem, is already a meaningful takeaway. Lastly, embrace. Maybe you left the art museum feeling inspired, but maybe you left with more questions than you started with. Maybe you left confused or even a little skeptical, and all of that is okay. There's not one set way to walk away from an experience like this, so don't stress about getting it right. Instead, focus on your emotions. For example, embrace the questions you still have by writing them down. Embrace the parts you didn't like by understanding why you didn't like them. And embrace the parts you did like by telling to someone about it. Because what matters in the end is understanding and embracing these reactions, not ignoring them. So, I encourage you, enter an art museum, bring people with you, engage with the artwork, and embrace your findings, because you'll never know what new questions will emerge or what new lessons you'll learn along the way. Thank you.